Well, hello. This is Dr. Bryson, your nerdy criminal justice professor, with a feedback video for week two and the assignment on the video of the Attica prison riot. So this is for the class CJ2430 corrections. Um, I wanted to give just a little bit of feedback on various parts of the video and some of the responses. First, let me say some things about the responses. Remember that this is an academic setting. Because it's an academic setting, we need to use logic and evidence. That means that our emotions are irrelevant to whether the conclusion is right or wrong. Remember, we are looking for evidence to support a conclusion. And there are a lot of things that I have feelings about, and my feelings basically would get in the way if I let them of doing the right thing sometimes because I get overwhelmed with emotions. Now, please don't take too much into that. When I say overwhelmed with emotions, I mean we all sometimes feel very strong emotions. So I was using the editorial I, by the way. So we all get overwhelmed with emotions sometimes, but we don't do the wrong thing. We do the right thing. So it's just really important to understand that how I feel about the contents and the material is irrelevant in relationship to the correctness of the material or the truthfulness of the conclusion. Emotions have a place, but it's important to remember an old saying that folks in recovery groups, I believe this started in AA, but other recovery groups use it. Emotions are like children. You better not put them in the trunk or you're going to get accused of abuse. But you better not let them drive the car either. So try to keep that in mind. In an academic setting, we need to think about the material. Now, having said that, there were a lot of folks that were upset or at the way that the inmates were treated, and I am not going to be here and say that conditions were wonderful for the inmates. I'm not going to say that. So let's just get this up front. The conditions in Attica needed to change. So let's just get up front that I do believe that conditions in Attica needed to change. The conditions were horrendous, but there are some things that we need to be aware of. First, let's start with the idea of the principle of least eligibility. That is a correctional principle that says an inmate should not have it better than a poor person on the street. So let's kind of think about that for a minute. And when I say think about that, I mean I want you to think about it. That wasn't a rhetorical statement. I want you to think about that. If you need to pause the video for a second to think through that, think about that concept. Think about someone who might be a serial rapist and in prison for the rest of their life. And some of their victims, because of the pain that they've suffered, end up being homeless. And the rapist actually has things better than their victims. Is that fair? Is that just? Is that justice for the victims? Now, let's get back to the documentary, the film. I've seen that so many times. I've seen the show that it was a part of several years ago when it was first released. But one of the things I'd like for you to think about, you're watching that as criminal justice students who understand that we might need some reform in the correctional system. Imagine that you were watching that as one of the victims of the inmates that were showing up on TV back in 1971. Imagine you're one of them. Would you see the images? And if you were watching that documentary, would you have the same view that you have as a criminal justice professional, as a student trying to get into the criminal justice system who realizes we need some reform? Would you see it the same way? What I'm trying to get you to see is that perspective matters. Point of view matters. Now, some other things that I want to point out. The documentary showed a news clip from the time that showed one of the inmates stating some of their demands. One of those demands was minimum wage. They wanted to be paid the state minimum wage. So remember that principle of least eligibility. They're getting housing for free, food for free, toiletries for free. All of their basic needs are being met. Now, is it the best tasting food? No. Is it the best cot? No. But they are getting all of their basic needs to live met. And they're not being paid rent. They don't have to pay for their lunch or their dinner or their breakfast. They don't have to pay for their bedding, for their toiletries. Now, if they have money on their books in commissary, they can purchase more expensive brands. That is true. But they don't have to have any money to get any of those things. Should we charge them for those if they're going to be paid minimum wage? In other words, should they start having to pay rent for the cell? Should they start having to pay like they would pay at a restaurant for their food? So that demand was never going to be met. It was never going to be met because that violates the principle of least eligibility in some ways. Now, there was another demand that I recall, and he said that mail not be censored. Well, in a prison, you have to read the mail. Inmates cannot seal a letter that they send home. The only mail that can be sealed is legal mail. The only mail that we cannot read is legal mail. All other mail can be censored, and it's necessary to censor it. We have thwarted, just my own knowledge from having worked in a prison, we have thwarted murders by reading mail. We've kept drugs from being smuggled into the prison, weapons from being smuggled into the prison, just by reading mail. So mail is going to be censored. That's not a reasonable demand. Now, let's think about the storming. Was that a valid use of force? In the end, when we look at criteria for use of force, legally, it was valid. Now, it may not have been morally, but we have to keep in mind there's a difference between moral and legal. We like to think that as a society we operate on morality. We do not. We operate on law. The inmates had taken over the prison by force, and they were holding hostages. Holding hostages is considered violence. The very fact that they were holding hostages meant that deadly force could be used. Now, do I think they did it the right way? Do I think that they might have played some manipulative games? Yes. Do I think that Kunstler was used as a pawn unwittingly? Yes. Do I think the way that they did it was cold? Yes, but it was legal. Do I like it? No. But remember, my emotions about it aren't what count when we're getting to the logical conclusion. And the logical conclusion, based on the law, is that it was legal. We may not like it, but it was legal. Now, we might be able to effect reform so that wouldn't be legal anymore. But at the time, especially, it was legal. Now, some of you may or may not have seen one of the officers, after it was over with, yelled, "White power." Even at the time, that was not legal of an officer. I have no idea what happened to that officer. I hope he lost his job, but I have no idea. Probably not 1971. Remember, this is not too many years after the Frank Serpico incident. But there were other things in there that were illegal, that were troublesome as well. Now, lying to the public about what happened to the hostages that died, that was wrong. Unfortunately, there's nothing illegal about it. Now, it's illegal to lie to the courts about it, but it's not illegal to lie to the public about it. Again, I don't like it. I don't like that they lied, but it was legal. That's the thing that we have to always keep in mind when we're talking about these things. Now, if it's legal and we don't like it, then that should motivate you to find logical ways of solving the reform so we can fix that so it can't happen that way anymore and be legal. I would never say so it can't happen anymore, but to say it can't happen and be legal. See, those are two very different things. People do break the law, and we can't stop them from breaking the law. In fact, in a free country, we should never stop them from breaking the law. We punish them after breaking the law. That's what freedom means. Until someone has actually broken the law has no jurisdiction over them. All right, I've shared some things here. You may really be angry with me about the things that I said, some of the things having worked in a prison, and let me be just very, very direct. Prison riots are no joke. They're very scary. Now, the prison where I worked, we strove to keep the inmates safe and to provide them a really good environment. We understood, and here's the thing that I didn't really get the point from anybody in your responses. We understood if we treat them respectfully and make sure that they have a good atmosphere to do their time in, that we were going to see a lot less violence, that we were going to see better behavior out of them. So maybe that's the place to really think about logically, that if we change, if we reform in some ways, we can get some of these other prisons to be more humane places, more humane places. Maybe that's really what we need to learn from all this. All right. I've gone too long, and I know that. I hope you've paid attention and really heard the words that I'm saying. I'm not saying that what they did was morally right. I'm simply saying that it was legally okay. They did not break the law. We'll see you on next video.